Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah McGrath. I'm a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with ServiceNow, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. I'd like to introduce Andy Jordan, President of Referenzian Consulting, and Scott Wallace, Senior Product Manager with ServiceNow, who will be speaking today about why IT strategy is dead and what's next. Andy will begin by taking a look at how IT organizations are perceived today, and how in many organizations, IT is not considered to be an indispensable partner of the business. He'll consider how when it comes to business strategy today, many business leaders don't really involve IT, and instead look at IT as just an internal service provider that can even be outsourced if necessary. Andy will then discuss how if IT leaders want to change that perception, IT strategy needs to change in the future, and involve IT leaders as essential partners in the success of their organizations by developing an IT strategy that integrates with business strategy. Scott Wallace will then showcase how ServiceNow's IT Business Management solution can help provide the shorter planning windows, more rapid change, and business-driven outcomes required to enable IT to become that indispensable business partner. We'll then open it up for questions. Andy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Deborah said in that introduction, we've got quite a lot of stuff to cover today, and I've also got a polling question which I'm going to ask you later on, so I'll explain what we do with that when we get there. So I'm going to go straight into this. I know it's a lot of content, but I want to make sure that you've got time for questions. So let's get straight into the background. And I want to start by just thinking about what technology management actually looks like. Because if you've been in IT for a while, you've seen a lot of IT management change. And let's just sort of reset ourselves and say, okay, where are we at right now? So I think from my perspective, there are three key elements, three key cornerstones, if you like, or pillars to technology management. And you see them here on this slide: speed, distribution, and purpose. If you think about speed, it's probably what IT is most associated with at the moment. We know that technological advancements are happening at a tremendous rate and have been for quite some time. So that evolution is driving faster decision making. It's driving customers to expect better solutions more often. Their satisfaction windows are getting shorter. Some product that delights them on day one is something that they think should be replaced and modernized just a few weeks, months, years later at best. So that's something that is driving this whole speed of technology. We've got less time to adoption, less time to maturity, and by extension, less time to obsolescence. And that's making the whole technology life cycle to go much faster and making the whole thing much more shorter, much more compressed, a lot more turnover. From a distribution standpoint, we've moved from the typical historic model of a centralized IT silo in the organization, if you like, where everything was managed from an IT department, to now where the decision-making is increasingly distributed across different areas of the business. Business department heads expect to have a degree of autonomy over the technology decisions that impact them, which solutions, which platforms, which services they use. And that means that there are more and more technology decision makers, and that siloed piece, the piece that actually lives within IT, is much more limited in scope than it's historically been. And that's probably set to continue. We're probably going to see even more erosion of what is typically seen as just IT, and more decision making moving out to partner with the business. And from a purpose standpoint, well, the way that IT is seen right now, or the way that IT should exist right now, is about balancing the technology environment between what we have to support today, but how we also grow for the future. We still have to make sure that we have a stable platform, a stable environment, a stable infrastructure, but we also have to make sure we're enablers of growth. We have to make sure that as we evolve our technology, we remain aligned with what the business needs for it to be successful. It's not about what's good for IT, it's about how IT is good for the business. And that means that we have to exist to inform the business on opportunities that are available to them, things that might threaten them from a technology standpoint, and the challenges that are inevitably part of that, either in today's technology or in the disruptive technologies that are beginning to emerge in our particular industry. That's a reality. It's a complex environment, and it's what we all have to live with and manage every single day. The problem is that that's not necessarily the way that the business sees us. We're not necessarily seen as balancing those three key areas. Instead, we're often seen as nothing more than a service provider. We're seen as an execution function that actually manages the delivery of IT services, but don't actually contribute to the business's success beyond that. The business can't get by without us, but they don't necessarily want to engage us in growing their business, driving it forward, making the organization better as a result of the work that they do and the investments they make. We're increasingly seen as being replaceable. This is part of that driver of distribution of decision-making across the organization. Now business leaders are looking to outside service providers as much as they're looking to us. So we're seen as more and more a candidate for outsourcing, especially as we get to not just software as a service, but also infrastructure and platform as a service-based model. The growth of things like Amazon Web Services is really making that something that is a candidate for getting rid of IT entirely in the extreme. And that's something that the technology advancements that we're seeing are something that is perceived as the business as making business technology management simpler, more straightforward. You don't need to invest in an expensive expert function to manage technology anymore. Instead, you concentrate your investments in what makes a difference for your particular business and outsource everything else. And that's a scary place for IT to be. There's also still a perception from the bad old days of IT, if you like, where we're seen as slow and self-serving. We can't respond quickly enough to meet business needs, and we're seen as being in it in order to play with the new technology or to play with the cool stuff, not to be able to deliver business performance. We're not seen as responsive to business change. We're only seen as responding to technology change. And we're also seen as focused on what we want to do, not what the business needs us to do. We know that's not fair, but we also know, if we're honest, that this is the perception that people see when they look at IT functions. It may be based on outdated thinking, but it's still very, very real. But before we start looking at that directly, I want us to consider our partners. I want us to consider the business. And in particular, I want you to think about business strategy as it exists today. Because if you're working in the business, it's a very, very scary place. There's a lot of things that are driving business to change very rapidly and considerably, a significant amount of change. And it's really coming down to three categories. You can see them at the top here, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this on the next few slides. I know there's a lot of text. Don't worry too much about reading this. You've got access to the downloads of the content here. You can get that and look at it offline. Just sort of listen a little bit more to what I'm saying, and I'll try and hit the key points of this rather than just read through the content. So we're dealing in the business with these three key drivers, if you like. There's forcing the business to be continuously adaptive, let's put it the title. There's this concept of shorter planning windows, more rapid change, and then business outcome-driven decisions. I'll talk about that one in a couple of minutes. Let's start with the shorter planning windows. You've probably been part of or at least seen the annual planning cycle that traditionally organizations did. And in the past, that was all about not just plan for how much money we're going to spend, but allocating that money out to different initiatives, to different business areas, and then actually approving projects to go forward. IT leadership might have been at the table if they wanted to invest in new infrastructure, if they wanted to invest in some kind of new ticketing system or support system. They may have been part of it if they wanted to do network upgrades or equipment refreshes or whatever it might be. But there were also increasingly a lot of technology involvement in business projects. So you might have a new product launch that had a technology component. You may have process improvements that also had automation software or something like that involved in them. Well, those days of approving those on an annual cycle, that's gone now. We can't do that because the world is changing too quickly. We still do annual planning, but now annual planning is just about the investment budget. It's about how many millions or how many billions potentially you've got to spend on projects in the coming year. When it actually comes to the specific projects, that's moving to a quarterly planning cycle. In fact, in some organizations, it's actually moving to more frequent than that, to a monthly planning cycle. And there's a lot of parallels here with something that we're familiar with in IT, and that's agile development. What's happening in a lot of organizations now is that the projects that get approved are actually becoming part of a backlog. If you've got a project that can start work right now, then that's fine, that's approved, it gets sent to a project team, the work gets done. maybe managed in a waterfall way, maybe managed in an agile way, maybe a hybrid combination of the two, but that work gets started. Another project that the organization thinks it wants to invest in, thinks contributes to the good of the organization, but can't start straight away, goes into the portfolio backlog, a list of projects that we're continuously managing, reprioritizing based on the needs of the business, and then as soon as resources become available, whatever's at the top of that portfolio backlog gets approved and gets resourced and starts work straight away. So because that's a constant reprioritization, it's active management, that's why we're moving to this quarterly and monthly planning cycle for the actual project delivery. Very different for the business, a very rapid way of looking at things. The reason we're doing that is because time to solution is critically important. We're working in an environment now where we've got a huge amount of competitive change. It doesn't matter what industry we're in, the barriers to competition are being broken down, both geographically and across traditional industry cycles. Because of that, we've now got customers who expect us to do more and more, because if we don't, one of our competitors will. Also, our customers are becoming more aware that they know what's available, they know what's emerging, and they expect to get the latest and greatest things, so the satisfaction window is getting shorter. The reason why time to solution becomes critical is if we can't identify an opportunity to do something better and then deliver on that in a matter of just a few weeks or months, somebody else gets in, we get a reputation for being slow, and either we miss the opportunity completely or we end up delivering against a need that is out of date, and then we're perceived as being behind the times and we never get to win. That's a real problem for the business because they'll never be able to achieve their goals and objectives. And that's something that is keeping executives on the business side up at night. They have to deal with this. They have to deal with the idea that things are changing rapidly. And from a project execution standpoint, project managers and project teams, they're seeing projects that are approved and everybody knows that's not what you're going to deliver, that the plan is going to change, the scope's going to change, potentially the schedule's going to change, maybe the budget, maybe the quality standards, maybe all of the above are going to change as we execute through that cycle, because we're going to learn more, the world's going to move on, and we're going to have to adjust what we actually deliver. This is business reality, and it's a scary place to be. That sort of leads into this second point of this idea of more rapid change, and in particular, the idea of business agility. Now, business agility is similar to, but not the same as Agile, not even on the scaled Agile, the SAFe or similar frameworks that have become more popular. Business agility is all about understanding what's going on in the environment around our organization and being able to adapt and respond to that. So, for example, changes to what our competitors are doing, changing to what customers are demanding from us, disruptive technologies that are emerging and creating new threats or opportunities, for changes in the regulatory framework, any of those things that could impact our ability to deliver. Executives need to be able to identify those early, recognize when they have the potential to damage or create an opportunity for the business, and then adjust and adapt what the business does in such a way that we maximize the opportunity and minimize the damage, minimize the disruption. In other words, we need to be able to adjust and adapt as if we're a speedboat. So we go along and we quickly change direction, and then we head off at full speed in another direction. We've got to avoid being seen as like an oil tanker where it takes us not just 6 miles to slow down and turn around, but it takes hours and hours and hours to get that direction change and then back up to speed. We can't afford to waste that time. So this is something that is becoming critically important to the business. The idea that change has to be quick and speedboat-like, sort of changing on a dime, switching rapidly between initiatives. That only happens when we anticipate that change happening. We're looking for it constantly as opposed to looking for things to stay the same. We recognize that Agile and hybrid waterfall Agile delivery methods help us to make that adjustment quickly and obviously engage the customer more in the process, so we have a better idea of what kind of change is needed, and we make sure that we're evolving that whole delivery process. Now, the last bullet point in this section is key here, this idea of moving from project delivery to product delivery. And this is something we can relate to a lot in technology because it's really impacting us there. The idea that when you're developing software, you don't need to package that as a project. You can release functionality, you can release a feature as soon as it is ready to go. The idea of continuous delivery. that we've all heard a lot about in the last 2 or 3 years. Well, that's something that is becoming recognized as important, not just in software development, but in other areas of the business where we can deliver things piecemeal, where we don't have to bundle everything together. You can't do that in construction industry. You can't build part of a bridge, but you can do it in a lot of different disciplines. So we're moving to this idea of product delivery, where we don't artificially bundle projects together, bundle features together as a project and release them once a quarter, once a year, whatever it might be. Instead, we release them as soon as they're ready and have permanent teams instead of temporary project teams. We have product teams, and we release functionality continuously by those product teams instead of just having a group of people coming together, doing one set of deliverables, then moving on to something else. It's a very real shift, and it's changing a lot about how organizations operate. Finally, this idea of business outcome-driven decisions. If you worked in projects until recently, you knew all about the triple constraint. We have to deliver on time, on scope, on budget. Well, let's be honest, nobody cares about on time, on scope, and on budget unless we're also on benefit. We have to deliver the business outcome. Nobody invests in a project because they want a new product. They invest in a project because they want the business benefits, the revenue, the market share, the profitability that that new product will develop. And that's what this is all about, making decisions that protect and improve the business outcome. So we're now moving to the idea of project team autonomy, where the people doing the work get to make those decisions because it takes too long to elevate requests for decisions or approvals up the line, and because the people at the top of the organization are too far removed from where the work gets done to know what the right decision is anyway. So now we're expected to deliver on benefit. We're expected to operate autonomously as project teams to be able to deliver all that stuff. And if we don't, we're not going to be able to achieve the business results. At the same time, project managers and teams are dealing with the fact that what has to be delivered is fluid. Just because we approve a project to deliver $5 million of revenue doesn't mean that if we hit $5 million of revenue, everything's good, because the goalposts move. It may be that another project fails and we have to get $6 million, $7 million of revenue. That's reality. That's what happens in business. That's what we have to deal with. We have to recognize that it's not just the target of what we have to do that shifts, but actually the goals we have to achieve that shift. This is business, this is reality today, and this is why they're downright scared about how they get stuff done. And that's the environment we need to be able to help them out with. We need to help them manage this environment. Because at the end of the day, we're driving this. Technology is driving this. Not IT specifically, but technology is driving all of the stuff I've spent the last few minutes talking to you about. It's advancements in technology that are redefining what is possible. It's this idea of disruptive technology that is coming along and creating new opportunities, creating new threats, creating new competitors and new suppliers. Customer expectations and competitor actions are being empowered by technology and forcing us to do things differently. We're also redefining industries. I've put some examples there of 3D printing, AI, robotics, whatever it might be. But think about the most mundane things now. They're driven by technology. Your refrigerator can order your groceries for you. You may well have to do a firmware upgrade on your car or a software upgrade on your car. It's not just turn it on and drive anymore. Things are becoming so much technology-enabled and technology-empowered that everything is being driven by technology now. Everything is changing. Globalization is redefining the markets and market segments. Just look at the Whole Foods and Amazon partnership as a typical example of that in action now. The traditional industries and lines there are being blurred. Retail is the most obvious example, but by no means the only one. And at the same time, related to this, but very distinctly different, is this idea of the traditional office environment changing. Everyone says it's down to millennials, which I don't buy that. Every generation in the history of the world has been blamed for changing things. That's not how life works. It's just that now there's recognition that the traditional office environment was built in the day when we had to be physically connected to a network. We had to physically be connected to a telephone exchange and have a telephone on our desk. And those days don't exist anymore. We've got just as much power and just as much control in our back pocket. We can work on a transit system. We can work in a coffee shop. We can work in our home offices. It doesn't matter. And that's changing how things get done and how people expect things to get done. The problem with all of that is even though it's exciting and even though it's technology-driven, IT is not seen as part of the solution to that. Instead, we're seen as an anchor. We're seen as a barrier to that kind of performance. We're seen as slowing down an organization's ability to respond and adapt to what's happening from a technology standpoint. We're seen as focused too much on the tactical issues. We don't care about emerging technologies. We're just going to make sure we fix all the bugs in the current systems. We're seen as focused on stability, keeping the current state, keeping the lights on, maintaining uptime, not disrupting what exists in the technology infrastructure and embracing the newest and greatest things. And of course it's important to keep a secure platform, a secure network. Of course uptime is important. Of course we need to make sure support tickets are resolved. But at the same time, we have to be managing the business to build for tomorrow, not just keep the status quo going. We're seen as embracing stability. We're seen as trying to avoid too much change because that's disruptive to the technology and that may cause problems and go against what IT is traditionally seen as being able to do. But perhaps worst of all, we're seen as legacy thinkers. We're seen as based on this is how it should be done because this is how it's always been done. We're seen as the black box, not transparent to the business, not accessible, not able to explain to the business this is why we need to do what we're doing. These are the pros and cons of different approaches. We're seen as the anchor, the problem, not the solution. And that's something that has to change. Now, I'm going to get into how I think that needs to change in just a moment. But because I've been talking to you for quite some time, and just to give you a break from my voice, I'm going to ask you to share your opinions here. So you'll see a polling question in front of you, and I'm simply asking, how is the IT department perceived in your organization? And you can see that there are 5 options there that you can choose between an equal partner to the business at the top, all the way down to an increasingly unnecessary cost center at the bottom. I just ask you to select one of those radio buttons alongside the answer that you think is most appropriate, and then hit the submit button that you see there in the middle right-hand side of your screen when you've chosen that. And we'll give you a few moments to do that, and then I'll share the results with everybody. So, Scott, while we're waiting for the responses, let me bring you into this. And what do you think we're going to see? I'm kind of hoping, to be honest, that we don't get 100% of people saying that they're equal partner, because I'm not sure what I'm going to say for the next few minutes if they do. But I'm also obviously hoping that we don't get 100% of people saying they're an increasingly unnecessary cost center. So what do you think?
Well, I would say if it's in a normal situation, it'd be a bell curve, right? So we're going to see probably the majority of the people in the middle. I hope to see a lot at the top, maybe 25% or something more at the top would be nice to see. I hope I see a lowest number possible as a cost center. You know, that's not something that people like to see us as a cost center. So I hope I don't see much there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, my last option there was obviously a little bit provocative, but I do fear a little bit that people are going to say a necessary cost center at this point, but we'll see. All right, just a few more seconds to submit it, and then I'm going to share the results. So, all right, let me close it down now, and I will share the results with you. And there you go. You can see it on your screens now. The biggest choice, Scott pretty much nailed it. It's almost a bell curve. So 55% of you, just over 55% of you said a service provider to the business, which I guess isn't too much of a surprise. In the top half of the bell curve, if you like, we had just over a quarter of people, 10% people saying an equal partner to the business, 16.7% saying a junior partner to the business. So I see that as encouraging. Only 1 in 10 of you saying, hey, we're equal already, so lots of room for improvement, but at least we're starting to make that shift. On the bottom half, not quite so positive there, 15.8% saying a necessary cost center, only 2.2% saying an increasingly unnecessary cost center. So I see that good. 15.6 rather, sorry, not 15.8, 15.6 there. So, but still, that's not great, is it? I mean, 18%, 1 in 6, a little bit more than 1 in 6 are saying we're just a cost center. As far as our employer is concerned, we don't do anything but spend money. That's not really a great thing. So we've got to address that. We've got to become more relevant, because otherwise, sooner or later, we are going to be outsourced, whether we like it or not. And that's not a good thing. So here's my view of the necessary future. I'll just run through this, then I'll hand over to Scott, and we'll make sure we got some time for some questions for you. Let me start this just simply with a quote. And if you take nothing else from what I'm saying to you now, take this, please. IT must evolve from an execution focus to an intelligence focus. Here's what I mean by that. So two sides, obviously, as you can see to this slide. I'm not going to read through the left and then read through the right. These are paired comments. So we're going to sort of jump between the traditional perspective of IT on the left and what I think the successful, modern, future-looking IT organization needs to look like on the right. So getting straight into it. Traditionally, IT delivered the work to support the technology backbone. Well, in the future, we deliver the thought leadership and guidance on what technological capabilities need to be. So we still act as that backbone manager, but from a thought leadership standpoint, we're not focused as much on doing stuff as we are driving stuff and guiding it and helping it go in the right direction. In the past, IT executed everything from the smallest help desk ticket to the largest major program. Now we guide investment decisions, large and small, regardless of how the decision to execute on those decisions actually happens. We may have nothing to do with how a solution is implemented, but we still inform and guide and consult and act as a subject matter expert. In the past, we delivered physical work, we managed physical and virtual infrastructure, and we managed supplier contracts. In the future, well, we may still do some of that stuff directly, but increasingly, we are going to be managing work indirectly. We're going to be managing service providers. Typical easy example is cloud-based infrastructure, but there's many more. But we've moved away from that on-prem, that on-site server room or data center to off-site cloud-based infrastructure and servers now. So that's the kind of model that is going to become more common. Typically, IT operated from a central control point. There was the IT silo and everybody lived inside that. Now, we're moving more to operate across all business areas. There's probably still going to be a small silo of IT resources, but increasingly IT expertise is going to live alongside business partners. So we have IT experts in engineering, in operations, in HR, and finance, who understand the needs of those specific business areas. Historically, decisions were driven on technology based on that technology. In the future, technology decisions are going to be based on business strategy. Nobody cares if this is the latest and greatest thing unless it can help the business succeed more, unless it can help the business achieve more. In the past, IT prioritized stability. In the future, we have to prioritize adaptability. The ability to evolve and grow as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, as successfully as possible, and with the minimal possible disruption. This is the future of IT. And this is the future of IT leadership, at least successful IT leadership. The characteristics of a successful, future-driven IT leader, and you may have these already, but many don't, unfortunately. You understand the business environment. You understand why the business needs to do what it wants to do. And you understand the impact that current and emerging technology has on that business environment. IT leaders have to be capable of contributing to long-term vision and long-term strategy. You have to understand how the business is evolving and how technology can and must support that evolutionary process. In other words, you have to recognize not just what is good for the business now, but you have to recognize what is good for the business 6 months from now, a year from now, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years even. How are things going to change more in the future? You also have to make sure that technology is enhancing the business's ability to deliver. We have to make sure that we as IT leaders are saying, hey, look, there's something happening over there that we need to keep an eye on. We shouldn't be investing in it right now, but this has got a lot of potential for us. We need to be ready. Maybe we start thinking about a pilot next year. Maybe we start doing a fact-finding exercise. Maybe we should just get these guys in and talk to them because there's something there that we might be able to use. Business needs us to be able to identify those opportunities, bring them forward, because that's what separates us from the competition, that ability to do stuff. We also have to make sure we don't care how we deliver. We don't care whether we own the delivery or whether we outsource the delivery to somebody else. We don't have a stake in getting stuff done. We have a stake in the success of what gets done. And maybe more important than anything else on this slide or anything else in this presentation, we always, always, always put the business first. The technology that we invest in, the technology that we manage, the technology that we implement is only relevant if and when it supports the success of the business. That is why we exist. That is why we have a job. So I've been speaking to you now for a little over half an hour. So I'm just going to wrap up and hand over to Scott by saying, look, here's how we create this partnership. This is how we succeed. If we do this, then our IT leadership can finally be considered to be a significant partner of the strategic business. We sit there at the table and we are seen as one of a number of equals who work collaboratively together to create a synergistic relationship that helps the business achieve more than if any one of those pieces were missing. Right now, too many organizations view IT as bringing nothing to that table. We have to get to the point where we're looking out for the needs of the business and where the CEO recognizes that without a CIO or a CTO at that strategic table, the organization would be poorer. It wouldn't be able to succeed as well. If we can do that, then we truly achieve what we really need to achieve. We help the business to succeed. We become an enabler of performance. Forget the anchor. We're now the rocket that we strap to the back of the business and help it to go much faster than it could go without us. And we're becoming the differentiation between us and our competitors because we don't work for our competitors and we're not providing our competitors with the support that we're providing our own leadership. That allows the business to focus on the highest value work. It reduces the costs and it increases the capabilities, not just because of emerging technology, but because of what we as a technology leadership team are giving to the business. And with that final thought in mind, I will hand over to Scott, and he'll help explain to you how ServiceNow is actually doing all of that stuff already, and all you need to do is sign up. So Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, for sharing your industry thoughts on why IT must evolve from an execution focus to an intelligent focus. Where business outcomes drive IT decisions, and how IT becomes the strategic partner that enables your digital transformation. So please allow me to share with you how ServiceNow's IT Business Management enables your organization to become that strategic partner to your business. We will see how IT Business Management supports rapid change with shorter planning windows and an increased focus on business-driven decisions. And we will see the critical links between the iterative planning cycles and the ability to respond to business change. In this short demo, you will see how business strategies are defined, how those strategies are tracked to meet targets, and when action is needed, how you use the investment portal and the portfolio workbench to respond quickly. And then we will see a scenario where a strategic KPI indicates decisions are needed to meet a business strategy, and how we use IT Business Management applications to meet those goals. So shorter planning windows require effective connection between the business strategy and goals to achieve those strategies. Using ServiceNow's business planning, we're able to define the business strategy and their relationships to the applications that enable those business outcomes. So effective management of those business strategies requires that we're able to respond and track progress in delivering to those outcomes. Here we see, on the screen here, this view, here we see the links between setting the business strategies using Business Planner and how those strategies are connected to the business goals as defined in ServiceNow's application portfolio management. This top-level business planning allows you to define, track, report on achieving those business outcomes. So having set those business strategies using business planning, now let's look at the connection to portfolio management. Here we see ServiceNow's portfolio workbench. It's a top control layer in the management of your investments. This workbench brings together all of your active investments, timelines, costs, and resourcing, all in support of driving faster planning cycles. This actionable workbench allows your organization to adjust their IT portfolios and stay in alignment with those business strategies we talked about earlier. This enables portfolio managers to review portfolio performance and then take action when the variances to targets are seen. Having all this data in the ServiceNow platform allows for a very adaptive and responsive portfolio management process. Next, we see the layer for control of the execution layer. So before we just saw the top layer, right, the control layer at the portfolio workbench. Now let's look at the connection at what I would call the execution layer. As the shorter planning cycles demand more frequent portfolio reviews, the execution of work also demands more frequent development cycles. Here we see the agile control layer, and specifically the SAFe Big Room Planning Board, and also you'll see the Scrum Sprint Planning Board here. ServiceNow supports both Scrum and SAFe in support of rapid development and deployment of business applications and services. Your agile teams can work in a fast and efficient workspace, allowing for more effective delivery of work to meet those business strategies and goals we talked about earlier. Say, for instance, your execution layer is also project-based. We also support traditional waterfall and hybrid work models. Next, let's look at an example scenario where a KPI indicates we need to adjust a portfolio to meet the business targets. So here we see an example of a dashboard. This one's called the Corporate Strategy Dashboard. Remember the earlier business planning view where we defined those business strategies and goals that are linked to the business outcomes? Here we see those KPIs being reported in a dashboard. And you'll notice this is trending. There's trending information over time. This dashboard shows current business KPI aligned to those goals we defined and shows the variances to expected outcomes. And you can see here red, yellow, and two greens. So grow the business investments. Those are in-flight projects and investments. That's the red right now, the upper left. Grow the bottom line. Those might be goals for, say, improving profitability. Next up is like delight the customer. This would be, say, customer satisfaction surveys. And the bottom one here in the orange is employee engagement. This might be NPS or Net Promoter Score, or maybe employee SAT scores. So next, let's walk through a scenario where we see something happening, as we do here with the red, and go through a scenario, and we can see what we need to adjust and how the portfolio manager is going to take action. So here, the executive leadership is expecting you're delivering to the business strategy, right? And so we can clearly see here that we are underperforming on the KPI grow the business. We're off by $5 million. We're coming up short. So we need to respond. We need to take action. Delight the customer and improve the bottom line. Those are on target. The employee engagement in orange, that can be prioritized. We're going to look at grow the business first. We'll return later to employee engagement. So the question is, where do we start? How do we respond? Where do we go? So here we can see all the information in one place because it's on a single platform. At this point, we can also determine what action needs to be taken. So let's go look at the investment portal to see our portfolio investments for grow the business. This will help us determine what actions need to be taken to improve that KPI. So here we see the investment portal, and specifically highlighted, it's grouped for grow the business strategy. This view represents a collection of active investments, such as in-flight projects and planned investments or planned projects, which are sometimes called demands. You will also see that the portfolio provides a single view, allowing for faster decision-making. All this information is collected together. You will see grow the business investments that are related in the metrics, such as those timelines you're looking at, the financial information for those investments, the status of those investments, status being the project specifically. This view gives you a complete set of actionable information that helps drive business decisions. So next we look at here the same view. I went too far ahead here. So when we look at this view here, we notice that we need to increase the grow, right? So we were off the target. Since we're below target, we need to take action. So grow the business project investments for fiscal year 2019 are $5 million. Like I said, we're off our target by $4 million. So we need to act on increasing investments to grow the business strategy to resolve what I would call an underinvestment. You see in this view a list of active 2019 projects and 2020 planned investments. Those are the bottom ones in purple. To meet the target of $9 million, we need to shift investments. We need to shift $4 million from 2020 planned to 2019 execution. So we can see these highlighted in the bottom. They select the demands for execution in this year. So here we see the portfolio manager. They're looking at this view. They can see what decisions need to be taken. By selecting the planned investments for 2020, those are the demands like I mentioned in purple, and moving those investments into 2019, you can grow the business strategy by roughly $4 million. This investment portal provides you with the visibility so you can see what action needs to be taken. And it also provides the portfolio manager with insights to help drive the requirement for faster planning cycles. So after the portfolio manager does some reviews and makes decisions to move investments from 2020 to 2019, you can see it will be reflected back in the dashboard. So the portfolio manager has converted the 2020 planned investments to 2019. And because of that, we're on back to $9 million. So as we mentioned earlier and we saw earlier, the portfolio dashboard, along with using the investment portal, the portfolio manager could use the portfolio workbench to also understand the impacts to, say, resourcing and budgets before taking final action. Because, of course, shifting from 2020 to 2019, there's going to be impacts to resourcing and scheduling and so forth. Those will need to be evaluated, right? So ITBM is a part of a single system of record and supports the need for data-driven decisions. We bring all this information together in ServiceNow's IT Business Management application, and we're able to help you become that strategic partner that helps drive your digital transformation. So in conclusion, we saw a scenario where the strategy for Grow the Business indicated that we needed to take action to meet the expected business outcomes as defined by those business strategies and goals. And we use ServiceNow's IT Business Management applications to assess, respond, and take action, all in support of driving faster planning windows, rapid change, and outcome-driven decision management. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for watching and listening today, and I will hand it back to Deborah for Q&A.
Thank you, Scott and Andy, for that great presentation on why having an integrated strategy and partnership between IT and the business is so critical for the future success of an organization. We'll turn now to our Q&A, and we've had many questions coming in throughout the webinar. Andy, this first question is for you. Here we go. Based on John Rossman's Amazon Way of Internet of Things book, the biggest challenge is to convince the VP, CIO, CTO, or CFO. And what would be your recommendation to get buy-in from these decision makers?
Great question. And that's a great book, by the way. The Amazon Way on IoT by John Rossman. John, those of you that don't know, John Rossman is the guy behind Amazon Marketplace, who sort of basically built that up to be a significant percentage of Amazon's business. So clearly he knows a few things, and clearly he knows how to leverage technology. He's absolutely right that sometimes the challenge is getting that buy-in. So what you've got to look at is what's in it for them. If you want to get buy-in from the executive team, if you want to get buy-in from the CIO, the CTO, you've got to think, why do they care? Why should they care? What is in it for them? If they can make themselves more successful, whether that's a CFO making more money, if it's a CIO becoming more relevant, more engaged with the business, whether or not it's a CEO who's making the whole organization more successful. if you understand what it is that makes them successful, if you understand what they care about, then you can deliver something that matters to them. You can speak their language. So as a simple example, if we want to try and convince the CFO to buy into what we're saying, to listen to us, to consider our contribution, you don't talk about new technology in terms of these great new features and how it can do things faster or how it can do things that technology couldn't do 6 months ago. You talk about how it's reducing financial risk, how it's reducing costs, how it's making the cost model that you do have to incur more sustainable, how it's enabling greater revenue, how it's reducing the threat of outages, whatever it might be that matters in financial terms. When you're talking to a CIO, you might have a slightly different conversation because they care about different things. So make sure you're talking their language, make sure you understand why they care, what's in it for them. If you can answer that question, you're going to go a long way.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, Scott, not to leave you out, I've got one for you. Okay, so where does all the data used in the demo come from, and how long does it take, on average, to compile sufficient data to enable the decision views you presented today?
Great question. Really good question. So the demo data specifically was built just for the demo, right? So that was constructed to represent, an integrated view from the top to the bottom. But ultimately, the system itself provides the source. So your business processes are going to enable that collection of that data that's going to support that end-to-end. So activities in planning, your investment planning, your project planning, your resource planning, your time, all of that information kind of comes together. That's why I say it's a complete system. All of the information you saw in that demo represents a lot of activities, and natively the system is going to collect that information to source it up. You will, of course, have to define your business strategy. That systems, we're going to want someone to define that. But those are representative of what the business outcomes are. Here are my KPIs. But it's all the collection of the information below natively that's going to roll up. But very good question. The demo data, that was just built for the representation, but your business should be able to see this pretty quickly. If you establish the business processes and you're collecting that information, you're going to start to see the information roll up, and you should be able to quickly start to see where you need to make decisions.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. Andy, another one for you. This may be premature, but the leaders in our IT department are studying the quantum age of IT, which is really in line with what you're speaking to. Do you have advice on how to get a seat at the table with business partners when they are strategizing?
Another great book. That book's 6-7 years old now, I think, but it's still sort of the definitive book when it comes to IT transformation. I think that similar to the conversation that we had when I was answering the question about the John Rossman Amazon way on IoT, it's asking that right question. You're going to get a seat at the table if you demonstrate that you have the ability to contribute at that table. Executives want to surround themselves with people who can make them more successful. They don't want to be surrounded by yes people just for the sake of it. They want to be surrounded by people that make them look better. You make executives look better by understanding what they care about and meeting those needs. So you don't worry about trying to get a seat at the table because that's focused on the wrong stuff. You worry about helping your organization, helping your business to succeed more successfully or to succeed more completely, and then you'll get the invitation to the table. The book is all about IT transformation to make the business better. That's what we need to focus on as IT, and that's sometimes, if we're honest with ourselves, where we sort of lose focus. We focus on the technology itself, not on the business benefits that come from that technology. And cool technology is great and all that, but if it doesn't meet a need, if it doesn't serve a purpose, it doesn't help us out. So to get a seat at the table, understand the need, and demonstrate how you can help meet that need through effective use of technology. And if you haven't read either of those two books that have come up so far, I encourage you to go out and read a copy. They are well worth it.
They sound really interesting, Andy. I want to ask another follow-on question that came in that kind of dovetails onto that. How do we convince business executives who don't understand today's technology that they need us as partners to deliver this?
Yeah, this is a problem I see, and I'm going to stereotype a little bit now, and I apologize if anybody works in the public sector, but it's a problem I see a lot in the public sector where the leadership thinks anything that is new technology-wise is high risk and therefore scary, and we have to keep away from it. Some industries have to embrace the latest and greatest, because if they don't, their competitors will. If you're working in a less competitive industry, then you can perhaps be a little more conservative. But if you don't understand what the new technology is capable of, if you don't understand how much technology has advanced in the last little while, then it's a very difficult conversation to have with the business, because you're kind of talking about magic stuff that they don't understand, and they're not going to necessarily buy into that concept because they don't understand, they don't have a context, even if you try and sell them on the benefits of it. If you help them to understand how it can help them and they don't have a context for that, you're not getting anywhere. So I think you just have to look at baby steps with that. You have to look at how you can move things forward gradually. You can't, as an organization, go from an existing technology platform that may be 5, 8, even 10 years old to today's latest and greatest technology without a huge amount of disruption. You just can't do it. Doesn't matter how good the technology is. So you've got to make a gradual evolution. And sometimes the hardest step is that first step. It's overcoming that inertia. It's getting things to move forward. So don't look at a true revolutionary transformation. Look at more the start of an evolutionary journey that may take you 2, 3, 4, 5 years to catch up to the latest and greatest technology being in use, but you're at least making change. You're having those dialogues. So if you're working in that environment where your leadership doesn't understand what's possible today and hasn't kept up with technology, and it's not just public sector, but that's an example of one area where it can happen, then look at overcoming the inertia, starting to move things forward, and then you start gaining momentum, and then you start having executives and business leaders who are interested in making things even better because they see that they're making some progress and want to keep that going. And that makes it a little bit easier to then start talking about getting to the latest and greatest. It's not easy, but it's an important journey to start. The sooner you start, the sooner you'll succeed.
Thanks, Andy. We have lots of questions coming in, and it's interesting, for every question you answer, we have another one from the other end of the spectrum. And Scott, I'd like to ask this to you. For those organizations that are adapting rapidly to the needs of the business and constantly embracing new technologies, how are their portfolios of IT services impacted?
Terrific question. They will be impacted, of course, as you begin to grow and adapt your portfolios and services. Probably, I think the first thing you're going to see is, one, you're going to be asked to do more. If you become that strategic partner, I would expect your portfolios would grow, right? So, adapting and changing, that's what we've been talking about here, and it's a matter of a process of growing them faster. So, one of the capabilities we have in ServiceNow IT BM is the ability to look at the business capabilities that sits in APM. And if you look at capabilities, you can tie those back to your portfolios and what are you delivering to the business? What services, what types of services, and those might represent types of portfolios. But I would definitely say they will be impacted. The good news is, I'd like to say, is you have at your fingertips now ways to manage those portfolios, to see the impact of those portfolios, and to respond to the business faster than you ever could in the past. So even though they're going to grow, they're going to probably get more complex. You're going to expect it to show responsiveness to those performance measures. You can do it much faster. You can do it in cycles that just a few years ago you really couldn't do as fast as you can do today.
So here's another question for you then. Considering what that answer, this question goes along with that about the staffing for that. So other than a dedicated PMO team, what is the typical staffing and systems needs in order to execute on this?
Yeah. Terrific question, because it kind of relates to what I call a maturity model and how you grow. As we noted, as Andy noted, this isn't a standalone IT. It's got to be a partnership with the business. And one of the key things I think when you look at this is it's difficult to go end to end of this just with the PMO as an example, or an ePMO. You have to involve the business, which means you have to involve an organization that does architecture. You have to involve an organization that does finance controls, because there's lots of relationships in the financial side of the equations, right? You have to involve teams that are doing DevOps, operations and DevOps, right? So you got Agile. So there's layers throughout your entire organization that need to be involved. So when you embark upon this journey, you need to look at it much more holistically. It's not the ePMO or PMO taking on an activity traditionally that they might. You need to look across. You need to engage architecture, right? you need to engage finance organizations to understand how to support their cost models, right? So I think you need to look, broader than say just IT from a staffing perspective, and make it much more. Again, we talked this earlier about the teaming concept, right? It's not just IT. There is a team, and that team should have the wherewithal and the knowledge base to execute across the business.
And the right skills, obviously, right?
Yes,
Thank
definitely.
you, Scott. Mm-hmm. So, Andy, I think we have time for about one more question, and this last one is for you. Speaking of skills, the question is, I've noticed over the years that many IT leaders lack the soft skills to work with other departments effectively and get lost in their own world. How can future IT leaders work on their soft skills so that integration is more turnkey?
Oh, sure. We've got about 2 minutes left, so you just throw the grenade question at me. The typical IT geek with no communication skills. It's a terrible stereotype, but it's a terrible stereotype that exists for a reason, unfortunately. There are many of us in IT who perhaps lack the ability to communicate in the language of the business. And that's something that has to be overcome if we're going to be successful. We can't expect the business will learn to speak geek speak or understand technological terms. We have to be able to give them the so what factor. We have to be able to translate into communication that is relevant to them. And that doesn't just mean talking in terms of financials and ROI and things like that, but it means speaking in plain language in terms of how things help the business. And being comfortable doing so in an environment that is not naturally our own. That's something that you have to have an innate skill to be able to do, to have that level of competence and confidence. So not everybody who is an IT leader today is necessarily cut out to be an IT leader tomorrow, but nor would they want to be. But that also doesn't mean they can't succeed, because a lot of IT leaders have got great leadership quality. They are still leaders after all. A lot of senior IT leadership positions are a lot more about leading people and creating an environment where people can give of their best than they are about managing ones and zeros. So people have the skills today. They just need help encouraging and developing them. And just as we have to help our business leaders to understand what is possible with technology, so business leaders have to invest in IT leaders, in technology leaders, to make sure they've got the competence and confidence to make that communication effective, to have those conversations in such a way that they can actually contribute. And that's partly about leadership skills and training programs and development programs that have to be invested in, just as you would invest in any other kind of training and development. But it's also about giving those IT leaders the business skills, helping them understand what makes an industry tick, what makes a particular company tick, understanding the things like balance sheets and financial equations that have to be considered. It's all part of that development program. This is not about technology adjusting, it's about the business adjusting to new ways of working that embrace technology. And that means investing in a lot of different areas to develop those skills, and IT soft skills are a part of that. But they're not the only thing that needs to be done, but they also can't be ignored. So that's the most complete and diplomatic answer I can give you.
Thank you for handling that grenade extremely well, Andy. I can see how it's all very important for helping to establish that all-important partnership between IT and the business. And that's all the time we have. In closing, I'd like to remind everyone to check out the resource list and the companion ebook on why IT strategy is dead. And finally, I just wanted to remind you that you'll be able to access this webinar and all ServiceNow webinars on demand